opportunities. When I play the game of the NLA, I can see where my money goes, and it's an investment into our culture.
Yes, Grenada, when you play the games of the NLA, you enable us to invest in the skills and talents of our people in the areas of sports, culture, and nation building.
Good evening and welcome to another community forum. I'm your host Byron Campbell and of course our co-host Chris Diali. Good evening, Chris.
Good evening, Byron, and good evening to our listeners and viewers. A pleasure to have you again and for us to come and interfere with your thoughts on certain things.
Well, we have a lot to talk about tonight, Chris. A lot. We have an array of subject matters and I doubt we have all the time required to do this. But let me start off immediately, Chris. Chris, you know, now with Trump 2.0, we have an issue. The U.S. government has announced, has gone after Cuba, and they are talking about the Cuba Labor Export Program, but specifically talking about the workers or the health workers, Cuban professionals that are all over the world actually, and they make a fundamental difference in terms of health care in so many countries, and you know what, including ours. And the threat is that those of us, those countries and those officials that participate or responsible for the program would be sanctioned, meaning that they will be denied US visas, among other things, you know. So that is but Grenada's respond, and I'm proud of Grenada responding, because I heard the foreign minister in the parliament talk about Grenada will stand firm with Cuba. He talked about that our health services will collapse if Grenada didn't take up. So if these workers were withdrawn, so Grenada will take a principled stand, and I'm proud of Grenada taking such a position. What's your take on this, Chris? Yeah.
Well, I think Trump 2.0 and his administration is really crossing lines that normally would not cross. Every country is a sovereign state, and you have within your sovereignty the option to choose who you align with in terms of your foreign policy. Grenada has had a long history with Cuba, and a positive one, from the days of building our airport to supplying and helping in scholarships, as well as, you know, human resource for the health system. So you looking to penalize a country because of your issue you have with Cuba, and trying to extend that outwards and penalize other countries for who they decide to partner with, I think is just ridiculous and is far-reaching, and the U.S. need to rethink, because, you know, at the end of the day, Mr. Trump wouldn't be there for long, for his 4 years. What happens to U.S. foreign policy after that? And if you're a country that want to annex Canada with all this nonsense they're talking, is no different.
And Greenland.
Yeah, so, you know, it is disappointing, to say the least, that you'll have that they want to use the carrot and stick. You know, if you don't accede to what I'm saying, I beat you into submission.
And this has been extended, Chris, particularly with the China issue, because, you know, China, including Grenada, has been providing a lot of investment, a lot of support, or stadium, or road, almost everywhere in agriculture. And the message coming in from the United States, Trump 2.0, is that you have to make a choice.
Yeah, a choice to what? You're withdrawing U.S. aid from us, and what you say?
What are you replacing? What are you?
The effects of your policy in climate change is affecting us more so than them, and yet still today I think they announced they pull out from a lot of the climate change things that
but you had to
were
keep
part
in
of.
mind the U.S. in terms of our highest remittances come from the United States. It's a huge trading partner with us. So this is interesting to see how it unfolds. But this intimidation and this bullying, which we're seeing, it's going to be interesting to see how this in fact plays out. Chris, the other thing I've been hearing, you know that some time ago, that we would have lost the financing for the Western Main Road, the UK CIF funds. You remember? What I'm hearing is that from the minister, the MIT minister, is that these funds have been recovered, but they have redirected the funds to rehabilitate the Grand Anse Point Celine Main Road. I think that's good news anyway, the fact that we've recovered these funds. It's coming back. It's coming to Grenada finally. That's one, but I'm concerned about the Western Main Road at the same vein, because we have a lot of bridges that are dangerous finally. A lot of the roads are slipping away where they are putting temporary barriers, and it's in poor shape, very bad condition. Notwithstanding that, Chris, I think it's good news that we recover these funds.
Well, I mean, priority, I think, is the word here. If the government decide they need to redirect the UK CIF funds that was originally for the Western Main Road.
Yeah.
Obviously, they believe the Grand Anse Point Celine's area is in more dire need for rehabilitation of the roads. And you could also argue that the volume of traffic on the Grand Anse Point Celine is far higher than what you will see on the Western Main Road. So I suspect from that angle, the government has decided, listen, let us give that a priority with the money, and they'll try and see if we could raise some other monies to deal with Western Main Road. And Molineux part of the Western Main Road has been a big part of the recovery of the Western Main Road. So as they go up into places like is Mabuya?
Yeah, but look at the Concord Bridge. That is
so I mean,
recently.
Probably they will do it in sections, bridges, and the worst ones first, and then look at rehabilitation.
But it's good news, Chris. One of the things I've been hearing, Chris, the Minister of Finance, Minister of Agriculture was making a point, and by the way, viewers, we will be discussing aspect of the budget a bit later, but I just want to pull this out because the minister was talking to it. He made it clear, he said that they'll be introducing legislation soon for the decriminalization of cannabis, marijuana, not legalization. But it's important that we understand the difference. Alcohol is legalized. It's available for purchase. It's available for consumption.
Or legalized to a certain degree. If you're under 18.
Exactly. But so that is not happening with cannabis. What they're removing are some of the penalties related for it with small possession.
Yeah, and that's what decriminalization is.
Yeah.
Decriminalization essentially says, from a legal context, that if you're caught with minimum quantities, not for resale and so on, commercialization, instead of you getting a criminal record as it stands, So if somebody's caught with 2 sticks of marijuana, the law now makes it that you have a criminal record, you arrest and you charge and so on. You could even go to jail and so on. So the decriminalization deals with that aspect. And of course, that is welcome throughout the region. We had a lot of studies done, and that was the first thing they had suggested that we do, because it really interferes with young people and their character going forward. The legalization is a more holistic approach. So legalization will speak to, if you want to open a business that deals with medicinal marijuana, that business could operate, they could grow to facilitate what they're doing. So it is legalized from that point of view. The religious aspect, the Rastafari movement, use it in their worship and what they do, so you get some kind of concessions there. So, but the problem with the difference with legalization, when you put in law that you're under 18, you can't smoke or you can't do and all that, is how you police it and the regulation. So legalization is a far more involved than the decriminalization.
Interesting. So that's important. Chris, there's been another drowning at the Concord waterfalls this weekend. Chris, in my life, no, but in a recent time, there's been, I think this is one too many. There's a lot. The question is, how do we reduce these incidents in a waterfall, in a public space, in a tourist attraction? That's what it is, because for these incidents happening. How do we? It's unacceptable. There are too many drowning in this area, in this
Well,
vicinity.
I mean, one way is to deploy lifeguards in the area, and of course, the other thing is that you just as we do on the beaches, we put areas, things where you say you're not allowed to swim because of the tide strengths of the currents and so on. In the falls, we may have to start looking at doing some things like that. Barricade areas that we believe is unsafe for people to just go willy-nilly if you can't swim and whatever, and start monitoring from that aspect. That will help mitigate some of these things, because then people will be told, that there's certain things that you cannot do in certain areas, and hopefully that will help.
Because this is going to affect our product, our tourism product, because it's a visitor.
Well, it may not. I mean, we have had drownings before, and the tourism project can get affected. So,
but we need to.
It's a safety issue.
To do something about this. Chris, last Saturday I think it was International Women's Day. But in this regard, I mean, not just congratulating all the women for their contribution, but one issue that stands out here, Chris, that is really troubling, remains a trouble in matter, is the gender-based violence. It remains, in my view, high, unacceptably high in our Spice Isle, that is sex crimes. I want to tell you the lifetime prevalence partner violence or sexual intimate partner violence, that means people who live together, in Grenada is 29%. It means that almost 30% of our women in Grenada have experienced some kind of physical or sexual violence in their intimate relationship.
1 in 3.
Over their lifetime, 1 in 3. In the last assizes, keep that in mind, 21 of the 34 sexual matters, 21 out of 34 involved children under the age of 16. We have a problem. I mean, and we've spoken about this before, but it continues. I know there is a special unit set up for these matters. I know that there are a lot of education around it. Is it reaching our menfolk in particular? Maybe we have more reporting, but it's unacceptable.
It is. It is a societal problem. And it's not only restricted to the law enforcement and the laws that we have on the books. I saw a recent thing where a young man charged for 34 counts of rape because he was having sexual relations with a young lady from 13. He started that and he got charged with 34 counts. I mean, could you imagine? This man has been raping this young lady from since she's 13 years, and she's now 17 or whatever. And when you hear those kind of things, you know we have a problem. And the problem is not only how you deal with it, but the problem is a society ready to tackle it and say, I see this guy with this girl, something had to be wrong, and I'm not entertaining that. Is the penalties stiff enough? I think the penalties could only go so far, because if you don't change the thinking of the men engaged in that, and the women to some degree, then that is where the problem starts. People would say the church is not reaching them, society through community relationships and what we do, but if it's a thing that is ingrained, how do we get the men to stop doing this? That's the $1 million question, and to me, the $1 million answer to this is that we just don't accept it. So if you have a friend that you're drinking beers with, and you know you're involved in some young lady relationship, you're supposed to call him out. Because
it's a crime now if you know of this and don't report it.
That's right. So you need to call them out. And not accept them as a friend and giving him a drink. Because unless we start doing it from that individual level, I don't think the men who are engaged will ever get the message. Because they'll say, you drink boy, I'm going to have fun with this, whatever. And if you don't call him out or call at the time. So for example, I have taken a decision years ago that anybody I know who's abusive to their mate, whether it's their wife or what, I don't want to have nothing to do with you. I'm not even offering you a drink. You come in my presence, I'm not interested. But you have to take a stand. And I think that's what we're not doing enough.
Chris, transportation, regional transportation, the new chairman of CARICOM, Mia Motley, she is promoting a ferry service initiative, particularly this service. And what she's saying is that she wants the private sector to explore opportunities with respect to to a ferry service, how this can facilitate like charter services, and she wants the private sector to take responsibility for this. She doesn't want the governments to get involved in purchasing equipment and so forth. How feasible? Do you think the private sector is ready for investment in this area? Is it how feasible is this?
Well, it's two things. I think governments have a responsibility to create the right environment for private sector to invest. Private sector investing in things like that is going to look at the risk associated with that kind of operation.
Mm-hmm.
The sea is a funny place. Mm-hmm. if you're moving from Grenada to St. Vincent with a ferry, if the waters are rough to a certain point, you ain't taking the risk. And then the cost for the private sector is running the vessel, paying people, and the insurance, more than particular, because of the risk involved, is going to be exceedingly high. So it's good to say you want the private sector to take it on. Yes, we have a problem with movement in the region, but we have to also weigh what are the concerns that we'll have and how we, and it's not about starting it, it's about ensuring that that service continues in the long term or in the medium to long. Trinidad used to use their ferry service from moving passengers from San Fernando to Port of Spain. You jump on the ferry, you could drive on your car instead of going on the road.
And Tobago,
traffic. And Tobago.
And Tobago.
But I mean, on the Trinidad island, they were using it as a ferry to move people instead of driving. So there is a positive side to it. But in Trinidad, the vessels are not privately owned. In Trinidad, subsidized vessels moving up and down.
So you're optimistic this will happen, Chris?
I'm not optimistic. I believe the transport situation between the islands and the Caribbean and the OECS needs to be looked at holistically. You know, we're still struggling with open skies policies, the cost of maintenance of aircraft. Some islands, you know, say they want to have it as the Liat when they had Liat as the hub. They're too expensive if you move it somewhere else. There's a lot of areas that we could look at, insurance and how you go for a bulk rate and maintenance. I mean,
look at the Dolly C. Dolly C ran aground after coming from scheduled maintenance, renovation in Trinidad. Ran aground. And this Dolly C has been providing that linkages, that important service for over 7 years. So it's a critical, very important mode of transportation, sea transportation, particularly for bulk.
Cargo, movement of cargo between the islands has always been by sea. The ferry service is a new addition to it.
That's going to be. Chris, I didn't hear anything in the budget. And again, we'll come substantially to the budget later on. But on the carnage remains. I know you've spoken about it before, Chris. Did you hear anything about the carnage?
No, as a matter of fact, I was criticized for raising the carnage with the passion that I did. But I see it as a priority project. I mean, you could argue, and I mean, justly so, that you can't do everything. But the carnage as a project, we have been speaking about that for many years and doing a ring road. Ending across in the tunnel by the riser there and so on. So it's not now we're talking about, it's not now we know about the problem with the porosity of the seawall on the carnage that has gotten worse, with the boats mooring on the wall, and sometimes you have 4 or 5 vessels parked alongside each other mooring. So the pull and the tug on the wall has caused major deterioration. And I cannot understand why we cannot put that as a capital budget item. You may say the project may cost, I don't know, 20 million or 30 million, but it is critical. And when you come into Grenada, the aesthetics of coming into the carnage and seeing the beauty, if we're not careful, we may lose this. Because if the wall collapses, the road goes with the wall, and then you can't have traffic on. And then the project originally had spoken about changing the carnage to be a pedestrian area and have fancy boats come in and have particular restaurants and so on. So to me is something that is becoming critical, and I'm hoping that we are not in a reactive mode. Wait till the thing fall down, and then we go say, oh boy.
But it's danger now because you have the ropes going across the walk.
That's
way.
right. That's right. Always
you
has
know,
been.
people, you have to step over the ropes. You have cracks in the walls. It's dangerous.
We have businesses on the Carnage pumping water out of the foundation 24/7.
Yes, so I think there is some urgency in this.
I would have thought so.
There's clearly some urgency. Chris, the other thing I picked up is that the whole question of the statutarization of the health services. I think this was announced. I was under the impression, though, that sometime earlier the year when the question was raised, that there were a firm, doing an analysis.
Mount Sinai.
And out of that assessment, they would then come to some conclusion, make some recommendation. But the minister now is very clear that this will happen, and actually moved to set up a board of directors, headed by, of course, by a well-known lady, Mrs. Andel, yeah. So that took me by a bit of surprise. What are the implications there for health service? What would it be more costly for, particularly those of people, nationals that are mostly in need, don't have insurance, can't afford medical bills? What will that do? What are your thoughts on this, though?
The hospitals seem to have always had an issue with management.
Yes.
And I think it's not only management, it's staff.
Yeah.
And the attitude to what happens in the hospital.
Yeah.
So I don't know if statutarization is going to address it. It will probably address it from the point of view of administrative procedures and processes that need to follow.
Yeah.
And make the hospital at least not a profit center, but at least a break-even place.
Yeah.
So if you go to a private hospital and a particular blood test costs $120, the hospital can no way give you for $40. Because at the end of the day, if they give you for $40 because they're saying, well, the ordinary man can't afford, at the end of the day, they wouldn't have no reagents to do the test because you have to buy reagents. So statutarization may help in that type of processing, which means that if we have to pay the true costs, then we may not be able to afford it, the average person. So it means that government may still have to subsidize the hospital significantly, even though you statutarize it, right? TAMCC is a statutorized organization, but if the government don't pump more than 12, 13, 14 million a year into TAMCC, the fees, the school fees, cannot stay as it is. If we, right now in TAMCC, the average course will cost you a parent more than $3,000, we charging $800. So who had to subsidize it? The government. Because they don't want to bring up the costs so that the average person will say, well, they can't afford it.
So this change of model may still require significant subsidies to be
because if you analyze, and we don't know what the Mount Sinai report is going to say, or if the Mount Sinai report is saying go statutorization.
But why not wait until the report is complete? It seems to be jumping the gun. So what's the point of having Mount Sinai spending this money, because it's not free services, we have to pay them for their services. So I don't know what's happening here, really.
I don't know if that goes. I don't know if that will change what service at the hospital in the next 9 months.
We heard also about the MNIB. Of course, the government had indicated that MNIB was going to be a new company.
IMEX or something like that.
That is some import-export company would be formed with private sector involvement. I think it was in second quarter of last year. It didn't happen. It's still being projected. The minister reports serious delays there. But it's critical, it's important. And so we're seeing a lot of delays in an important sector like this. Is it going to happen?
I mean, Byron, the reality of it is that Grenada needs a marketing board or some form of marketing board. Why? Because farmers need to have access to somewhere to sell their produce. You may argue not at the greatest price, and of course to engage in export if you have to be able to export. Right now, we have a big problem with production planning. So if somebody comes to us and say, listen, I want a 20-foot container of dasheen or yam, we can't supply because not enough farmers are in that area to provide that. So you have the production issues on one side, and then you have an entity like Marketing Board who's probably willing to engage in export, and they can't because they don't have the production. That's one. Any private sector that comes in to deal with Marketing Board is going to look for one thing: profit. I ain't investing money in something to do something, and I can't make money at the end of the day. If they had to be profitable, the footprint and the model of Marketing Board has to change.
Yeah.
Right? Marketing Board got involved in commodities like sugar and milk and rice and so on because the model for dealing with just farmers' produce and what they on-sell and you can't export cannot support the model and cannot support the footprint in having outlet in Sutter's, one in Grenville, 2 in Tong, one in Young Street, one in Grand Anse, and they used to do something in the medical school area. So a lot of things have to change, and we have to first put our minds to that change and what it will cost. People will go home, they will close down institutions, they'll probably use a different model. So you have to be clear what it is we're looking and we're asking for. Are we going to tackle it in conjunction with farming? And you hear the Minister of Agriculture talk about they're getting free, or relatively free fertilizer. Marketing Board was part of that. We have a thing with soursop. Right now is a private man that capitalizing on the soursop trade and exports, not Marketing Board. And Marketing Board is the one with the authority to do it.
And particularly in the context that where, in fact, the Minister repeated this again, that as a region, and Grenada included, are expected to, in 2025, this year, to reduce our food import bill by 25%. It's not going to happen. As far as I'm concerned, it's still growing. So I'm saying Marketing Board is a critical institution to assist in that process because a lot of stuff is going to waste. I know farmers, myself and others, who have difficulty selling their produce.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about fresh produce like citrus and other things that are needed, and we see it being imported by some of our retailers. Chris, viewers, we're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we want to go into Budget 2025. We have some, stay with us when we come back.
Fit for Life and Allied Laboratories, providing quality care and expertise. Fit for Life and Allied Laboratories, see our in-house doctors and our pharmacies. Get expert care and quality tests. When it comes to your health, you deserve the best. Fit for Life and Allied Laboratories, we're taking care of Grenada.
How am I supposed to finish cooking like this? I wonder if climate change is behind all these water shortages. Time to think about the future. It's really time to invest in a proper water storage tank, What water tanks you guys have available?
We have 450 gallons for a family of 3, 800 gallons for a family of 5, and 1,000 gallons for a family of 7. Purchasing any of these tanks will ensure that you have enough water stored.
Don't be like me and wait until you're out of water. Be smart, be prepared, invest in a proper water storage tank today.
Welcome back, viewers, to MTV Community Forum. Before the break, we told you we'll be discussing budget, Chris, budget 2025. But Chris, before going into the details, I mean, there was a bit of drama there yesterday in the lower house, yeah, where the members of the opposition actually walked out, was very critical of the speaker for not moderating the session, being the referee, the umpire, so to speak. That he was accused of taking a side and not following the rules explicitly. But what's your take on the fact you've spent 15 years in the upper house, Chris, so I see you as an expert. Certainly one in the know. To explain that to us a bit, what do you know about what happened and what's your take on it?
You're hearing story from one side. The Minister of Finance normally, that's the protocol, would listen to all the contributions from both sides of the House and then sum it up and then respond to issues that would have raised as the closing person on the budget. Now, my understanding here is that the Prime Minister didn't speak his part on make his contribution. One of the opposition members, Dr. Keith Mitchell, obviously didn't say his part as well. So there is this change by the speaker by allowing somebody else. The Prime Minister could be allowed to sum up. That is not something outside of the rules. In other words, the Minister of Finance could have given the Prime Minister that
privilege
to sum up.
Yeah.
But what is unusual is that the Minister of Finance started summing up with all these two individuals speaking on the budget and giving their contribution on the debate, which is an unusual thing to do. And of course, the speaker interrupted, stopped him. They had a recess to discuss it, allowed the Prime Minister to then close without giving the other side an opportunity to say something as well. So it doesn't appear that the speaker handled the situation very well. And of course, you will have bias. Remember, the speaker is appointed by the government. And as a speaker, when you get in the chair, you can't show bias of no sort. You have to try and be as fair as you can to both sides, or else you lose the respect of the House as a speaker. So I think it was unfortunate that that happened, because normally, when the budget debate comes, the Minister of Finance will present. If he presents for 2 hours, the Leader of Government Business on the opposition side will present for the same time. And then everybody else will give him an hour and 5 minutes, or 1 10 minutes. To say your piece, talk about your ministry, blah, 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 and the budget and so forth. That is how it is normally done, but everybody is given an opportunity to say their piece, unless they refuse. So when the time for Dr. Mitchell to speak, the speaker have to have said, Dr. Mitchell, representative of constituency, blah, 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 are you ready? Or are you going to obtain? And if Dr. Mitchell says no, well, then you know. He loses his opportunity if he don't want to say anything, and then the other side could sum up. But that wasn't done.
It was ugly, you know. It was very unfortunate. I mean, the Parliament is where you expect the high level of management, you know, of affairs, and there's been a lot of the critiques on the Speaker of the House for not adequately and professionally managing the situation.
This is not his first mistake.
Not the first mistake.
And you know, the lower house traditionally is a place of melee because of the politics.
Yes.
And it's politicians are doing it. The upper house, and I'm going to be biased now.
Right.
The upper house gives a more substantive
This is where the
detail.
senators are.
That's right.
Yes.
And they interrogate the budget in a deeper sense than on the lower house.
Okay.
All right. So let's see what happens in the Senate.
Great. But Chris, let's go to the budget essential. This is everybody, it's been referred to as a deficit budget, meaning that when you look at the revenue and expenditure, there is the revenue that is projected is inadequate, doesn't clearly satisfies the expenditure. So there's a deficit. But in this case, they have said they have identified, so to speak, where this deficit is going to come from.
It's going to be financed.
It's where it's going to be financed, yeah. But what's your take on it? What's the implications for a deficit budget?
You're hearing a lot of things, and I think that is confusing the issue as well.
Yeah.
The fact that the Minister of Finance had announced in a press conference earlier on, before the reading of the budget, that he's looking to raise 723 million, I think.
That's correct.
Through different mechanisms, debt being one of them,
Yeah.
going on the stock exchange, the securities exchange,
Yeah.
and issuing T-bills and so
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Then you hear that some people are saying that the deficit is fully financed because the government have a set of deposits in the consolidated fund that they could draw down on, as much as 300 million.
So, Chris, let me pause you there. So that's a bit of conflicting. I didn't hear the seven, because I agree with you that a press conference was called specifically to announce, to inform the population that be prepared, we will be borrowing, we'll be going on the market to find $700 million. Didn't see this in the budget.
No. And the question becomes, why put a deficit budget if you have all these deposits in our reserves and the consolidated fund? It means that you could finance it.
Yes.
If it's available. Because, you know, in years ago, we would say the consolidated fund is a black hole.
Yeah.
A lot of things is going, but, you know, you could never seem to spend.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue here is it creates a certain amount of uncertainty and in people's mind as to whether or not this is going to happen. And then put on top of that deficit budget, which is 380-something million, that has to be financed. A major part is going to be on the capital side, financing of the capital projects to the tune of $500 million.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to find monies to deal with that. All the school renovations that's supposed to start and building of new schools, you know, $25 million to the new hospital.
9 months, Chris?
9 months.
9 months. So the question, and in economic terms, it's called execution velocity, which is essentially implementation rate. How effective, and we have, and I heard this quite openly, the government advisors saying, look, there is a problem.
There is.
There is a problem. There's an implementation problem. I mean, it's not something that there's always been an issue with that, and it's no difference now with the present government, with the present administration.
What we did not hear.
Yeah.
The major constraints for implementation on the capital side is mainly labor, technical and ordinary labor, and capacity in respect to equipment, and you know, the heavy equipment to move and excavate and so on and so forth. So here we are, budgeting to spend $500 million in capital works, and here we are with 9 months to do it, with labor shortages, and we're not sure if money shortages yet. Because if you're drawing down on reserves from the consolidated fund and we have it in cash readily available, then it means that your contracts and all of that supposed to be signed. Remember, we started some of these things in April. We are at the end of March. So you would expect a lot of contracts and things have been gone through the process and to be signed. So you have the issue of the paperwork and the bureaucracy to deal with. MIT is supposed to bypass some of this. But I am skeptical that the government could spend $500 million in capital works, whether it's through loan or through deposits that they say they have, to get these things executed and have boots on the ground. We're struggling with Carriacou, with labor and building back better in Carriacou. We're struggling. Even materials. It is alluded that in this budget for the capital works that the private sector must start to stock up on things like lumber, cement, steel, and so forth and so on. But no business in the private sector go in and stock up and spend millions ahead of and not show that they're going to get the returns when the government start to execute, and when. So I would spend millions and have lumber sitting there for months and not expect. So is a chicken and the egg kind of thing with us in the private sector. We had to be sure that projects and contracts have signed, we have dates.
And procurement is a long and drawn-out process. We know that.
And we have laws concerning
procurement. What we
procurement.
refer to in terms of the Western Main Road, that UK grant, we saw that just the procurement process took 3 years. With the consultation, with the designs, with the contracting, So it is something to what I mean. What I'm hearing you saying, you're not optimistic that this how feasible this
and
is
remember,
as far as implementation.
In this budget presentation, the government have cited the sectors of construction, tourism to lead the economy and to get the kind of growth that they want to see, to 4.1% GDP growth.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you have the possibility of Trump 2.0 and his different policies that could have imported inflation. We are a net importing country. So inflation may not move at a slow rate that the government is predicting, about approximately 0.7%. It may be much greater than that depending on what happens in the US and what is going on. So it is all of those things that put some questions as to whether this lead sector in construction, which is a good thing, because construction, you're sure that employment will be done because people, from all levels will get work. And if it comes off, there's economic activity through the private sector, hardware businesses and so on. So that is good, generate money flow in the economy and so on. And people could, benefit, and the government could benefit through additional taxes like VAT and so forth, because the spending is better, people have money to spend. But it is not a productive sector, and is normally a short-term sector chosen to give you those kind of results that you want. So in the medium-term plan that the government presented, they expect the economy to continue to grow at an average of 4% for the next 3 years. So what is going to be driving that? Is it tourism? Is it construction? Is it education services? Is it agriculture? Agriculture, of course, and manufacturing is not high up on the ladder, so it's definitely construction, tourism. And education services to some degree. So it is, and every budget, let me say that up front, every budget is just what it is, a budget. Is a projection of what you
think you're going to
and
do.
your best thoughts and how you think things will pan out. But there's risks, and the risks they have to find a way to manage the risks.
But Chris, as we look at it, one of the things we saw when we looked at it vis-a-vis the revenue that we saw, recurrent was taking up 73% and capital 27%. That ratio, is it standard that you have this almost 75% recurrent and 25% capital?
The recurrent is always heavier.
Yes, heavier.
But in this budget, they're also projecting a primary surplus, which means that they'll have enough revenue to meet their expenses. Government's major spend in this budget is through salaries and wages. They have union increases to give, regularization costs. They have the pension issue.
Debt payments, which is a huge component of the recurrent cost.
Right. So that's before the primary surplus. The overall surplus will take the debt payments into consideration. But the government major spend is going to be in emoluments, salaries and wages. The government, when you take the total wage amount of people, it's probably 68,000 people employed by the government.
How much?
68,000 people. We're talking about people on the roads, and other contract people and so on. Is around 6 to 8,000 people in the public service, and that wage
6 to 8,000.
That's right.
Okay, right, good. Right? That's a lot, and that's
So they're the biggest employer. So when you have that, then the issue becomes the cost to meet it, with all the changes that they're making. The regularization is going to be a major cost, and so on. I think they detailed it in the budget, and the Prime Minister spoke about it as well. He says they are government of the people, and they have to satisfy some of these things with the people. And he spoke about pension and so on and so on, which is good. But when you come back to the Fiscal Resilience Act, there are targets in the Fiscal Resilience Act. How much salaries and wages must be as a percentage of GDP.
But that's been set aside for the time being, given the situation with Beryl. But Beryl, I'm to understand, only accounted for 16% of GDP, and it mainly affected Carriacou and small sections of the north. Is it justifiable that the government should be avoiding this control mechanism or this oversight or management mechanism?
Well, remember, the Fiscal Resilience Act was put in place to control the spending of politicians. And hence the reason they were given all these targets.
Right.
Suspending it means that they have a free rein, so to speak.
That's the point.
Now they have targeted reconstruction of houses in Carriacou and Petit Mahalet, which is fine. And nobody could complain about that. So construction, but as you rightfully said, Beryl only interfered.
Is that enough reason to suspend it
for that
long? Yeah,
because
for that long.
The minister announced that it's going to be suspended until 2026 or 27. You're not sure yet. You don't know what could happen in this hurricane season, what risks, what we will get, and if there may be a need to go longer. But the point is, the more you suspend it, the more the politicians could move funds, do what they want.
Free reign. Chris, the CBI, of course, I was quite impressed. Let me put aside. I was quite impressed with the amount of schools in terms of, because I know that's a problem. The educational infrastructure, which means schools, the quality of the schools. I saw there was a walkout of teachers in the South, one of the Cali's government school, complaining about the conditions there. So I think it was a good thing when I heard about that level of investment or that level of projects in new schools and institutions. So that was good. But in terms of the CBI, of course, you talked about this before, they significantly reduced income from the, I call it Citizen by Investment. It's called also
IME.
What?
Investment Migration Agency.
Investment Migration Agency.
Rebranded.
That the income is going to be significantly less. But last year, they had huge profits. After net was over 400 million. But still, I didn't hear in the budget or otherwise any investment coming from this particular fund. Did you pick up anything there in the budget? Was this mentioned?
No, I think the major issue here is CBI brought in 500 plus million 2024.
Gross, yeah.
And this year the budget is projecting 140 million. So that's
gross.
Gross. Yes, gross we're talking.
Yeah.
And that's a $400 million drop. Now, what could account for that? I think in another program, the chairman of CBI said that, or IMA said that, there were a backlog of a lot of files that was on thing in 2024, and they got rid of the backlog, hence the increase.
Okay.
They're not projecting that to be the same level of applications that's going to come in, and we know what's going on in the Russia situation and so on. But you would expect CBI being a source of funding that is so important, that the marketing of Grenada's program should be more extensive and widely done to high net worth people in Africa, Asia Pacific, and all of these areas, which I know they have clients coming from that area, but you expect that the marketing will be more targeted so that you could keep that 140 million probably to 200 or 300 million. You may get a drop off, but not so significant. The chairman did indicate too that they're looking to adjust fees to attract local people to come into the CBI program, IMA program. So if you, Byron, want to bring a group of businessmen together and say, listen, we are interested in doing a project to take on the national football team, to get them up to world-class standards and the cost and so on, and here it is, we want to come into the CBI program at reduced fees and so on, and we'll attract investors to pump money into that area. So something like that, and the chairman did indicate that that is something they're looking at, as well as he indicated that there are some high net worth people, he said about 1,000 of them that are really big businessmen in a lot of different areas that they're looking to bring together. So that projects they may have in Grenada that one, whether it's in ICT or whatever, agriculture, where that we could bring them together and see how they could invest through the CBI program. So I think there is a lot going for the CBI program, but it is concerning when you see that major drop-off and what the plans are.
How it affects the budget. Chris, let's look at the sectors of the population. If you're a student, if you're a young person, if you're a farmer, if you are a business person, if you are a housewife, if you are, which sector or who in Grenada should get excited about this budget in terms of, from your analysis of the budget? Who should be saying, wow, there's something in there for me?
The blue economy.
Okay, so let's talk about the blue economy. So fisher folks.
Yes. Fisher folks and related industries within the fisher folks.
So you're saying all the other sectors not...
well, no, I mean, we have the creative sector, which is the orange sector.
Right,
right, that you could get excited about that, especially young people and what concessions they were given. So that is also an exciting place for young people. But to me, the creative sector will take a longer time to develop and contribute at the GDP levels that we want.
Yeah.
Because creative things have to be tested and have to have an international appeal for what you're producing, whether it be to art, music, theater, whatever it is you're doing. That to me takes a while. Reggae in Jamaica is a good example. Jamaica is known for reggae because of Bob Marley and Third World and all of them went international and promoted it. And it was a big industry. For us, the blue economy, we're more surrounded by water than land, than the land where we have. We have not systematically exploited what is in the blue economy and done it in a scientific way.
Are we going to go that route, or just a name, removing fisheries and calling it blue economy?
When it was announced, the blue economy is supposed to be a separate ministry of its own. It's going to handle everything related to sea and fisheries and so on, with the exception of oil and gas. So you expect that the studies on whether you could use sea egg and for how long, and understand the migration patterns, the fishing of our tunas and so on. But more importantly for me is the processing part that they're supposed to deal with. And I've always complained that we have a lot of jetties, we have a lot of ice making machines all over the island in different parishes where we set up. We just did one in Soubise, and we have never sat and asked how could we have a processing part of those facilities installed. So when we sell our first grade tuna on the international market, and great, we get great prices for that and we have to continue. But what do we do with the second grade? And how could we process the second grade to make a canned tuna or different types of saltfish?
Saltfish. And Chris, I'm glad you raised it, because tomorrow is March 13, Chris. March 13. I get emotional with this, Chris, because it's the revolution anniversary, Chris, 46 years. But what's interesting there, Chris, I was looking at one of the old newspapers, and we're going to come back to budget. And what was exciting there was the initiatives and in saltfish, that local produced saltfish was more popular, more acceptable than the imported saltfish. And a whole industry was developing, there. And it's really sad that it ended after the revolution.
And that is lack of foresight. Because let's look at cornfish, which is a form of saltfish.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
We have been doing that for generations. The revolution came and saw that and decided to expand the industry. Did a lot of investigation on the best fish to use, whether it's bonita, whether it's shark, whatever, and tested it and got to a point where they were doing an excellent product. We dumped that because probably had the revolution attached to it. And here we are now, looking for things in fisheries and what could happen and give people adequate living, consistent living. We consume a lot of saltfish in our country.
We do.
And we could export as well. You understand? And if we get a fish that is better than the cod fish that we get, and we ain't sure about the quality of the cod fish anymore, right? Based on what is happening and what we're getting, why don't we do our own thing?
So it's doable.
Yes, and that's why I said I am excited about the blue economy, because I think there's so much potential there for us.
But in the budget itself, what was the allocation? Was it adequate?
You didn't hear much about it. Whereas I'm excited, you have sea moss farming. You have farming that you could do with mussel, the shell, right? There's so much things we could do.
Can do with it.
Yeah, shrimp farming. Yeah, a lot of things we could do.
Chris, something else I picked up, I think the remarks was identified by the leader of the opposition, noted there, but in the analysis there, it was reported that $2.1 million was utilized by the Prime Minister for overseas travel, entertainment, and hosting. Is this, can we live with that? Is that okay?
I mean,
is it? In other words, I would ask, fine, okay, it's a number. What was the returns? What was the gains? Was it necessary? But it don't appear that there was any specific budget allocation. It appeared that things happened and we allocated money towards it. There wasn't in other words, that was not projected at the beginning of the year to be spent. But is that a lot of money?
Well, let me answer it this way.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister have done a good job in changing our foreign policy and moving to countries that we believe can assist us. Africa is one.
Yeah.
The Chinese continues.
Yeah.
South-South trading is
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Instead of North-South trading,
Right.
both Central and Southern America. So
Yeah.
those are good moves
Yeah.
to realign our foreign policy, to go to countries who could assist us
Yeah.
in a more meaningful way, now that we're losing stuff under Trump 2.0. So I'm saying this to say, if there is a cost associated with that, and the returns can happen. When Mr. Dangote came here,
Yeah.
that probably cost the government some money to host him and the security and all of that and so on. But I haven't heard in any tangible way what Mr. Dangote brought to Grenada. When the Prime Minister traveled to China, which I don't think he had to pay, the Chinese will, but he
Accommodate.
signed a lot of MOAs.
Yes.
Right? So
That's productive.
and
Yeah.
and we may see things actually happening from those MOAs. So I answer it in this way because we're not sure what will come out of this travel and spend to move our foreign policy to
Yeah.
different places. So it may be
So Chris,
peanuts to get
so
what we
Chris,
get.
what we don't see related to the expenditure are the outcomes.
Correct.
What did we achieve from this expenditure? We don't get these reports,
And that
so we
is-
don't know.
and that
We
is-
can't. It's not measurable. It's not. Yeah, it's not measurable.
And that is a question for the Parliament. Remember,
Yes.
parliamentarians could ask the government
This question.
specific questions.
Can I ask these questions too, Chris?
Well, you
I'm
can ask it,
asking.
but you may not
I'm
get an
asking.
answer.
I'm asking. What is the outcome from the 2.1 million spent on travel and entertainment?
Probably you could bring the Prime Minister to our show and ask him.
Chris, yeah, okay, fine. Chris, one of the other things that budgets looked at is what they call the economic term debt to GDP ratio. In other words, they look at what our GDP is, what is the total value of our goods and services, and try to put a number towards it. What's average, what's moderate. But what I'm picking up here is that, and the numbers I'm seeing is from 2022, that it's 63.6% of GDP. GDP being 1.3 billion US dollars.
Well, I am somebody that believes smaller and developing states like ours must have debt.
Yeah.
We can't do it no other way. And debt to GDP is something that you have to manage. You don't want it. There was a time in Grenada's history when the debt to GDP ratio was in 100+%.
Yep.
Now we have it down in the 60s,
Yes.
which is a good thing. And
Okay.
the IMF report praised the government for keeping good control on it. And remember, debt to GDP, the equation goes both ways. If you increase the GDP through extra economic activity and new economies, and you keep the debt controlled, even though you have more debt, the debt to GDP ratio will be controlled. And the reason we look at that as a specific, because if the debt start running out of control, the ability to repay debt and to use monies that could be otherwise used for social programs and other has to go to debt. And then when you take the debt, you have to ask yourself, where was the money used? Is it in a productive sector, or is it just things like infrastructure and so on and so forth? So all of these are questions that you need to answer and have an understanding of how. But if your country could meet its debt obligations based on what we take in debt, I have no problem with it.
In borrowing.
Yes.
Every
because
country
we,
borrow.
we must
Yeah.
borrow.
Yeah.
We don't print money like the US and other places. So we
But even they borrow.
Yeah.
And China is
China
one
holds
of
a
their,
lot of their
and
debt.
China holds a lot of their debt, you know.
So I had no
This-
issues with debt to GDP and how the government is managing. I think they're doing a good job.
Anything noticeable or remarkable that came to your attention from the budget, Chris?
Well, you know,
that you want to mention?
My thing with the budget, and when you read the medium-term strategy paper, and you look at the risks, one of the major things for me, I think it was mentioned by some of the debate, the politicians in debate, is the constraints of labor. And in the CARICOM meeting that Prime Minister just came out, 3 things came out in particular: security in the region, education, and of course our labor shortages and how we intend to deal with that. And Barbados have a migration program. All of us going to look at that. And I have said, and I have articulated this before, if we need to get agriculture serious and food security, we must deal with the labor issue. Similarly for construction, our people are just not willing to work at the rate that we know they could work. And when indirectly what is happening here, our men are sitting on the blocks more and more and more, and are just not interested in using their talents, if they have it, to to work and work productively in those sectors. Agriculture will never move from where it is if we don't get a labor issue dealt with. You cannot afford to pay a man under the minimum wage what you're paying him and you only come in and give you 3 hours work. It cannot work. And if we want to change agriculture into a business and attract young people, then obviously we ain't starting in the right way. So my thing is, get rid of work permit. Get rid of the work permit.
That's radical, Chris.
No. Get rid of the work permit. Because we're talking about free movement of labor in the CARICOM, and we haven't done it yet.
We haven't done it.
Right? We have skill, and on skill, we do it partly for skill. You have to get a CARICOM skill certificate. Get rid of the work permit. Go to Venezuela, go to Trinidad. If you want to develop the marine sector and have proper skills for our people, we have to be able to bring in people that can facilitate and work and live here and enjoy a certain. Grenada have a lot of attractions to live here. Safe destination, good infrastructure and communications. There's a lot of stuff.
There's a lot to attract.
Yeah, so why not do it in a structured way? So we don't have to bring in 20,000 people tomorrow, or we could take 5,000 in this year or 2 years, develop the back end, housing, infrastructure, accommodation and so on, and put out a package and attract people. And part of the condition is that you train, you identify Grenadians to train. And here comes the education side. Because the government in this budget spoke a lot about
education, skills training.
Education and skills training, but what we didn't hear, that came out of the World Bank report, we illiterate, we enumerate, and we have no critical thinking. I haven't heard how a change in curriculum.
We didn't hear that.
Will address these issues from the very primary level come up. And how the method in what we teach and how we teach from mathematics and English and so on is going to change, and to get our young people to critically think. We're talking about skills training. We may train people in skills, refrigeration, plumbing, bricklaying, and what have you. And when they come to us in the private sector, they still cannot critically think if they face a problem. So a bricklayer or a plumber may be given a plan to do something, but on the project something changes, and he or she cannot use the intellect to say, well, boy, that is what it's supposed to be, but with this change, we may have to adjust it here, there, and so. They just stop and they leave it. And that is a problem we see with people coming into the private sector, where we need you not only to be certified versus qualified, right?
Yeah.
There's a difference. And we need, in all the skills training, you still have to get internship to understand how to apply the skills that you have been given in different situations. So you didn't hear that on the education side in a structured way. We hear a lot.
Maybe we'll hear it in the Senate, Chris.
Well, I hope.
Chris, before we close, one of the things we had to talk about is security, police. There's a new police headquarters. We have to give the government kudos for this.
Absolutely.
The accommodation, the location, and also I saw some some drone shots of the Fort George, Fort Rupert, whatever you want to call it. Beautiful. I think it's going to be exciting attraction, not just for tourists, but for nationals also. And also in the budget, Chris, there is what they call it, pay and grade
for the police.
For the police, which means, so I'm really pleased about the additional, the better accommodation and the infrastructure, the improvements that are taking place around the island for police security personnel. So that's a good thing, Chris.
Well, let me address it this way. Security is an absolutely critical thing for this country, because we are marketed as a safe haven, and granted so, because our police does an excellent job when it comes to solving of crimes in the country. Their rate is 80-90%. So that's excellent in our jurisdiction. Of course, I don't want to talk about traffic, but the issue here is that I see two critical areas in the police force. Succession planning for the High Command. I think that is not as strong as it should be. And that is a critical area. Who is going to succeed the guys when they move on? Some of them are aged, some of them, So that is one area. Then the equipment and infrastructure for the police officers, particularly in cybersecurity, is going to be, I think that is an area that needs to be significantly invested in, because it is becoming more of a crime than hard crime with guns and knives and so on. And then, the police themselves as individuals, I believe need to start taking care of what we give them. Vehicles is an issue. Bikes is an issue. Even the facilities is an issue. When you hear of some of the incidents that happen at the police stations, you know, men kick down window, mash up a toilet facility, and the expectation is, oh, well, somebody go fix that and give you back and so on. If the government is spending millions of dollars to give you a good facility to sleep and so on, you must take care of it. We must have that as part of the mandate. And the officers in charge must ensure that the officers that come up there, if they do things like that, they must be made to pay or come up with some system where they could pay. Because you can't just be destroying public property and not have a penalty. So I think the police is a critical thing. We need to make sure and ensure that they constantly have equipment that they could do their jobs and keep our country safe.
Chris, that's all the time we have. I agree. Chris, again, in closing, tomorrow is March 13th. Is a public holiday for me.
Okay.
You know,
I don't have that privilege. I'm still a working man.
You know? So, viewers, you can take the day off if you want.
Man.
I think it's an important day for reflection. I think we need more of the stories and more of the experiences from the revolution. In balance, you know, the lessons learned, you know, and I hope we find time on community program to talk about it, you know, because it's rich, and I think it's important that we're able to pass on these histories and these stories to the generations, you know.
Yes.
So, viewers, stay with us next. No, we are going away. Actually, we'll see you next week at the same time. Bye bye.